16-year-old Sarah Yarborough is being remembered as talented, creative, and kind.
Sarah was an A student at the high school.
Whenever you saw Sarah, she always had a smile.
This case is about a 16-year-old girl who had the right to grow up. This case is about Sarah and everything that she should have been allowed to become.
It was Friday the 13th in December of 1991. Her parents were out of town for her brother's soccer game. She stayed home.
I was reluctant to leave Sarah. She didn't want to come, of course, because she had her whole weekend planned out. So she had a friend come over and stay with her that weekend.
We went to a basketball game, went and got junk food at the grocery store, a little bit of fast food. You know, we're 16, we were carefree. There was absolutely nothing that would make any of us think that the next morning everything would change.
So Saturday morning, Sarah woke up kind of in a panic.
She woke up and said, "I'm late for practice."
She put on her drill team uniform and ran out the door.
She went to the school and discovered that she was early. So she parked in her car and waited for the rest of her team to show up.
Shortly after the phone call started, "Where's Sarah? Do you know where she is?"
Sarah was found within an hour.
Where was her body discovered?
So her car was still in the parking lot. Her body was approximately 100 yards away, still on the school property. Part of her clothing was removed. She had nylon stockings tied in a ligature around her neck.
I just remember just saying, "Not Sarah, not Sarah, not Sarah," over and over again.
The suspect is a white male, 6 feet tall, with a medium build.
They had DNA evidence, they had everything. They had witnesses.
In that first week or so, it sounded like they had so much evidence. You know, for at least a short while, it felt like,
Of course they're
going to catch him. And then when they didn't, your expectations change.
You don't know if it's your next door neighbor. You don't know if it's some random stranger. There was that constant fear of, is this going to happen again?
We literally had a monster in the community, and we didn't know who it was.
How often do you think about December 14th, 1991, and what happened on that day?
Quite a bit. It's a very traumatic thing to go through.
It's been over 30 years, but the details of that day have never faded for Drew Miller.
I had my friend spent the night at my house. We woke up that morning, watched cartoons, ate cereal, left to go skateboarding.
Drew, who was just 13 at the time, lived down the street from Federal Way High School near Seattle, Washington.
The school grounds have changed quite a bit, right?
Drastically, yes. The tennis court's the only thing that's still here.
Drew often took shortcuts through the school to go skateboarding, as he and his friend did that day.
We used to hop the fence right here and cut through here. It was freezing cold that day. I mean, there was ice in all of the mud puddles. We just, started smashing them because it's fun. It sounds like breaking glass.
That's when Drew says they noticed a man in the bushes.
Right where you see the edge of this dugout right here, that was all bushes that were probably this tall. So we couldn't see him until he stood up. He's just staring at us from the bushes. That was pretty jarring, but then he just walked out of the bushes. So then we just assumed he's just smoking weed or something.
The mysterious man kept to himself and walked ahead of the boys. Drew says they didn't think much of it until they came across a horrendous scene. There in the bushes, where the man had just been, was the body of a young woman.
It was horrible, absolutely horrible. The way that he left her body, she clearly fought for her life.
Drew says his shock turned to fear when he realized the man, who was still just feet in front of them, was now staring directly back at him.
Does that look still haunt you?
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's frozen in my mind.
The boogeyman, then?
Legitimate boogeyman.
The boys raced to Drew's house, and police were called to the scene.
When we approached the victim, on one of the pieces of clothing, we saw the name Sarah.
Detective Scott Strathy with the King County Sheriff's Office was one of the first officers on the scene.
And of course, later we found out that that was Sarah Yarborough. Even for experienced investigators, this scene was really hard to deal with. Just the innocent nature of this young woman in her school drill team uniform, with her hot curlers still in her hair. This was just pure, unadulterated evil.
Investigators believed this was a sexually motivated murder.
She was partially clothed. Her jacket, her undergarments, her bra had been removed and placed next to her body.
Police discovered that the car Sarah had driven that morning was parked in the school parking lot, about 300 feet from where her body was found.
There didn't really appear to be any sort of a struggle in the car itself.
Detective John Free with the King County Sheriff's Office Major Crimes Unit would later join the investigation.
She had a container of orange juice that she had made that morning. It was just sitting in the front seat. Nothing was tipped over. So the question was, how did she get from her car to this hill? What led her there?
Sarah was one of these people that would help anyone with anything at any time. And part of our working theory was she coaxed into following, the suspect? Did he say something like, "I'm looking for my lost dog," or "I can't find my car keys"? Perhaps Sarah, in an attempt to assist this person, may have followed him to that area.
Tell me about this one.
That was less than a week, I think, before she died. I said, "Could I take your picture? Because your great-grandma really wants a picture of you in your drill team outfit." She goes, "Okay." It was just too incredible to believe that it could even happen.
Sarah's parents, Laura and Tom Yarborough.
I mean, who thinks that your daughter's going to be murdered?
Tom and Laura had the excruciating task of having to tell their two sons the tragic news. Sarah's youngest brother, Andrew, was just 11 years old at the time.
At that age, you probably never seen or heard your parents cry much, but that pain in the voice is very, very vivid.
Sarah, who had just started her junior year in high school, had big plans for her future, starting with college.
She didn't want to go to a state school. She wanted to go to a school far away. She loved to travel.
I actually would hear her say, "I can't decide if I want to be a museum curator or an engineer like my father."
Yep.
And I was always rooting for the museum curator.
Liberty Barnes, Christy Gutierrez, Amy Perotti, and Mary Beth Tomey were some of Sarah's closest friends.
So this was after the last day of 10th grade, when we're just kind of goofing around afterwards. And that totally, you can see there's Sarah right in the middle of it, just being goofy.
The fiery red hair. Was that her personality?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
She was artistic, she was creative, she was smart, she was feisty.
Imaginative.
All of those things.
She would be the last one to wait for someone. Always be there with a smile. She would help with homework. It was her ultimate kindness.
After Sarah was ripped from their lives, they say their sense of safety was gone forever.
You grow up getting all the safety conversations with your parents, and bad things can happen, and it's all this sort of like vague possibility out there, and then all of a sudden it was like, no, 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 it can really happen. Yeah. It really did just happen.
It was all hands on deck. The sheriff's office put everything they had into solving this case as soon as they could.
And the killer left behind important evidence. Sarah had not been raped, but the killer's DNA was found on pieces of her clothing.
There was semen found on her underwear and on her jacket. We had a full male DNA profile.
DNA technology was new back in 1991, but investigators hoped that DNA would someday lead them to Sarah's killer. In the meantime, they had eyewitnesses.
I thought for sure somebody would know him.
Drew and his friend who was with him the morning they found Sarah's body worked with police, and a sketch of the man they saw in the bushes was released to the public. Police would later release a more elaborate sketch.
I very vividly remember going through yearbooks going, okay, who looks like this sketch? Everyone, it felt like at one point was a suspect.
But as days went by and as leads dried up, police kept coming back to Drew and his friend.
They just made me feel like I was the only person that could help them solve this. I know that wasn't the intent. Like, you know, the officers are just doing their best.
How much pressure were you feeling?
It's unimaginable pressure.
And despite everyone's best efforts, it would take years to find Sarah's killer.
This case was never forgotten.
In early June of 1993, 1.5 years after Sarah Yarborough's murder, local media were there as students gathered in the courtyard of Federal Way High School to honor her.
Bill Fuller, a family friend who helped spearhead the move for a memorial to remember Sarah, unveiled it with help from Sarah's younger brother, Andrew.
It was quite a day. A lot of tears as they looked at it and could see Sarah in that bench.
Bill Fuller has known the Yarboroughs for years, and his daughter was in Sarah's class.
Sarah was fun to be around. That was probably what we missed the most, is she was fun to be around.
The bench reads Carpe Diem, seize the day, a mantra Sarah lived by. Encased in bronze are some of her favorite possessions, ballet shoes, a replica of Sarah's beloved dog Gibby, and books.
Nice that people cared about her so much.
Andrew Yarborough, now an adult, admits that he struggled as a young teenager. It was especially difficult to see those sketches around town of the man police believed murdered his sister.
You know, there was drawings of the person's face all over in businesses in town. You know, I do recall that quite a bit, just having that kind of a constant reminder.
Looking back, I feel like we didn't do a very good job with the boys. I think that we were so consumed by our own grief that we didn't take time to help them.
I think we didn't really know how to help them. I mean, it wasn't something we had experience with. We didn't know anything about grieving ourselves or how to help them through it.
And they weren't alone in their grief. Shannon Grant, the last friend to see Sarah alive, says she lived with constant regret.
I wish we could go back and do it all over again. That I would have asked the other drill team members what time practice was, you know, maybe dropped her off. I mean, there's a lot of the what ifs.
The milestones were especially painful.
There was survivor guilt. Like, why am I filling out my college applications when Sarah wanted to go to college? This isn't fair.
Every joyful occasion had this sorrow that went with it. That was, there's one missing from the crowd here.
Graduation day, June 12, 1993, was an emotional day, but even more so since it fell on what would have been Sarah's 18th birthday. Laura Yarborough came to support her daughter's friends.
I do not know where she found the strength to do that.
She loved that green dress, right? Yeah, she wore green quite a bit with her hair.
Laura Yarborough says Sarah's friends helped ease her grief somewhat, and she thinks she filled the void for them as well.
Sometimes they would say, well, I'm going to date this person, and I just wanted to let you know because I wasn't sure if Sarah would approve of this person.
So they would seek approval through you. You became sort of their surrogate.
Yes.
As life slowly moved forward, investigators kept working the case.
I describe it as like a relay race where the baton was handed off from one detective to the next over the years and decades. I kind of refer to myself as the fifth Beatle in this investigation.
By the early 2000s, investigators had received over 3,000 leads, and advances in technology made them hopeful. They entered the DNA from the crime scene into the recently established CODIS system, a national DNA database that includes profiles of convicted offenders.
The strategy was to continually try to see if there would ever be a match while also investigating leads.
But over time, there appeared to be no match.
For us to have DNA evidence from the suspect but not have that linked to anybody, it just didn't make sense. It seemed hard to believe that the suspect hadn't committed any other prior crimes where his DNA wouldn't be in the system.
That's when he says detectives realized they had to go in a different direction.
My name's Colleen Fitzpatrick, and I'm one of the pioneers of forensic genetic genealogy.
In 2011, investigators reached out to Fitzpatrick to inquire about using forensic genetic genealogy, the practice of using software to compare unknown DNA profiles to information from public DNA databases and searching family trees to identify suspects. Genetic genealogy is well known now and has been used to solve numerous cold cases, but at that time, it was in its infancy.
When I started in this field, it didn't exist.
Fitzpatrick says most police agencies had been skeptical of this new investigative tool.
The police thought I was crazy, you know, this little old lady with a crazy idea, and I was actually almost laughed out the room.
But the King County Sheriff's Office took a chance on Fitzpatrick.
It was for free. I just wanted to see if it worked. What are you going to lose if you try something?
The Yarboroughs were encouraged.
I think it wasn't until we met Colleen Fitzpatrick that I really began to think, oh, you know, they're going to find this person.
And it didn't take long before Fitzpatrick came up with the name of a possible suspect that surprised just about everyone.
Everyone went, no way.
From the beginning, it was very promising. And the story took some really bizarre twists.
In 2011, 20 years after Sarah's murder, when forensic genetic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick started working the Yarborough case, she traced Sarah's killer's family tree back to a man named Robert Fuller, whose family had come to America on the Mayflower.
I found numerous matches to the name Fuller.
When Fitzpatrick gave the name Fuller to the King County Sheriff's Office, they immediately knew of one person with that last name. Bill Fuller, the Yarborough's close family friend, who helped get that memorial bench built for Sarah.
Naturally, that piqued our interest.
From the beginning, Sarah's family and friends believe Bill Fuller had nothing to do with Sarah's murder.
He didn't look at all like the suspect. The wrong hair color, he's short, he's not tall. He just didn't fit the profile at all.
Fuller's age didn't match the profile either. He's 79 years old now, but was 48 years old at the time of Sarah's murder, at least 2 decades older than the man Drew Miller described.
There was no way that I could be even remotely connected to the case.
He fully cooperated with police and voluntarily gave them a DNA sample. It didn't match the DNA found at Sarah's crime scene. Yet Fitzpatrick remained optimistic.
The good news is that we came up with a possible last name to investigate, and this was the first break in the case in 20 years.
Fitzpatrick knew that Sarah's killer was in the Fuller family tree somewhere, so she and her team went back to work. And as the years went by, she knew she was only getting closer, especially after 2018, when forensic genetic genealogy was used to identify the Golden State Killer.
Golden State Killer really started the big revolution. Things had evolved that we had the data to work with. The technology was in place that we could go for it.
Then in September of 2019, Fitzpatrick's team made a breakthrough. They came up with 2 new possible suspects, brothers Edward and Patrick Nicholas, who, as the DNA showed, were distant cousins of Bill Fuller.
You know, this is 8 years of on and off and looking at it, never giving up. This is it. This is exciting.
Edward Nicholas was a registered sex offender. His DNA was in the system, it was in CODIS.
But Edward's DNA wasn't a match, so they zeroed in on his brother Patrick, who in 2019 was a divorced loner who lived a couple of towns away from Federal Way.
We learned that he was working at an auto parts store, lived alone, no children, no friends or acquaintances that would even visit him. Everything that he did was mostly by bus. He wasn't driving.
Detective Ree says he discovered that when Sarah was murdered, the bus route Nicholas often took happened to go past Federal Way High School. Back then, Nicholas was just 27 years old, and around that time looked very much like the description of the sketch.
It looked promising at that point, but we still needed to get a DNA sample from him to match up to the DNA evidence that we had.
So in late September 2019, investigators came up with a plan.
We assigned a team of undercover detectives to start doing surveillance on Patrick Nicholas in the hopes of obtaining a surreptitious DNA sample.
Eventually, undercover detectives followed Nicholas to a laundromat.
They saw him go outside and smoke a cigarette, and Patrick Nicholas was seen throwing the cigarette butt on the ground. That was collected by our detectives.
That's what you needed.
Yes.
Right there, that cigarette butt.
Yes. Actually, he dropped 2 cigarette butts and a napkin that fell out of his pocket, and all 3 items were collected.
The DNA samples were rushed to the crime lab, and within days, detectives received the call they had been waiting for.
The DNA matched. This was our suspect.
Perfect match.
Yes.
Patrick Nicholas was arrested.
There were so many suspects over the years. Was Patrick Leon Nicholas ever named as a suspect?
Out of 4,000 tips, he was never named.
I was pretty in shock.
The news was a relief for Sarah's family and friends, who had never given up hope that they would get answers.
One thing the detectives kept telling us was, eventually technology is going to solve this case. I trusted that, and they turned out that they were right.
And I remember going out to my car and bawling, just bawling. Finally, they got him.
When Drew Miller, who had seen Sarah's killer back in 1991, saw Patrick Nicholas's face, he says he knew they had the right person.
What did he look like?
The same guy, just older. Just the same evil
face.
eyes. Those evil eyes stayed the same.
All these years later.
Yeah.
But it was not over yet.
Why do you think you're here? I have no clue.
During his interrogation,
Who are you in charge for?
when detectives specifically asked him about Sarah's murder, he gave an alarming response.
What we're investigating is the death of a young girl. Her name's Sarah Yarborough.
Interestingly, he asked what year this was, and that really sent up a flag.
Why?
Why would you ask that? He's being told this is a murder case. We're wondering at this point, are there other victims?
This is it. I'm not going to say anything.
After 1.5 hours, Nicholas asked for an attorney and stopped talking. But his criminal record would speak volumes.
I am the one that got away.
On a quiet morning in June 1983, 8 years before Sarah's murder, 21-year-old Ann Croney was sitting by her car along the Columbia River in Richland, Washington, when a man approached her.
He seemed normal, kind of friendly, actually, just friendly. I had asked him if he'd done any water skiing yet, because he said he had just moved to town, and he said he couldn't swim. And he said, "My name is Pat Nicholas."
After a few minutes of small talk, she became uncomfortable.
I noticed his voice was getting shaky, and I told him I had to go. I went to close the door, and he put a knife to my throat. Everything kind of stopped at that moment. He told me to take my clothes off.
Nicholas stuffed Ann's underwear into her mouth to prevent her from screaming, forced her out of the car, and led her to the riverbank.
We got about halfway down the bank, and he told me to stop. I ran and dove in the river because I was thinking he couldn't swim. Swam as hard as I could.
Swam for your life.
I swam for my life.
Passers-by found Ann at a dock nearby and called police. As it turns out, 19-year-old Patrick Nicholas was no stranger to law enforcement and had a record. He had raped 2 women and attempted to rape a third.
He'd been convicted of rape as a juvenile and had actually only just been out for a few months when he attacked me.
Days after Ann's attack, he was tracked down, arrested, and pled guilty to attempted rape. He told authorities, "I realize that I have a problem concerning raping girls." At his sentencing hearing, Ann spoke out.
I was actually very angry and asked the judge for the maximum sentence. And the judge did agree and sentenced him to 10 years. So I thought it was over. I thought that justice had been served.
But Patrick Nicholas did not serve the full 10 years in prison. He was released after just 3.5 years. Ann was never notified. She barely thought of him again until October 2019.
The police knocked on my door and said that there were detectives in Seattle that wanted to talk to me about a cold case.
They informed Ann that Patrick Nicholas had been arrested again, this time for the murder of Sarah Yarborough.
They told me that there were similarities in the cases, and I was crushed. It had never occurred to me that what I escaped from was a murder.
What's more, if Nicholas had served his full prison sentence, he would have still been behind bars that December morning in 1991, unable to murder Sarah Yarborough.
How angry are you to hear that he was released that early? And
Very. It brought up a lot of the old anger and even more anger because the system failed.
King County Deputy Prosecuting Attorneys Celia Lee and Mary Barbosa describe him as a serial predator with a clear pattern.
All of the women were approached at or near their car. He would strike up conversation and then pull a knife and tell them that they needed to walk, where he would order them to take off their clothes and then rape them.
Nicholas had also been convicted of sexually assaulting a minor in 1994, 3 years after Sarah's murder. 5 sexual assaults that investigators knew of, none of which had required him to submit his DNA, so there was no record of him in the CODIS database. But in pretrial hearings, the judge ruled that Nicholas's criminal history could not be entered in as evidence.
She found that it would be unfairly prejudicial to the defendant.
But the prosecutors were hopeful their case was strong enough.
All rise for the jury.
In early 2023, more than 30 years after Sarah Yarborough's murder, her accused killer, now 59 years old, went on trial. Sarah's childhood friends were there.
I so clearly remember the morning before the trial started just going, I don't know if I can do this. Like, you know, I had so many different emotions flowing through, and it was like, no, we need to be there.
There was this absolute love for Sarah and the Yarboroughs that was so strong.
Did you feel like they were a lifeline for you?
Yeah.
Be seated.
You weren't in it alone. You were all in it together.
As the trial got underway, the focus was on the DNA.
What was your strategy then in trying this case?
Well, we needed them to trust the science.
There was a field that was emerging called forensic genetic genealogy.
Patrick Nicholas's public defender, David Montez, challenged how forensic genetic genealogy was used to first identify Nicholas.
I want to dig into the science because
The first time that kind of defense had been used in Washington state.
they use technology that is not only unproven, but just wacky, really. He's not the person that killed Sarah. The police needed an answer more than they needed the right answer. And so they turned to new, novel, untested technology. Genetic genealogy is a new field. It really hasn't been tested out. Should we be making important decisions based on something that is not well or deeply understood?
But the prosecutors said that argument was moot because Patrick Nicholas's DNA matched the DNA found at the Yarborough crime scene. And Detective Free says the numbers were astronomical.
The odds were 1 in 120 quadrillion that...
Quadrillion, yeah.
Right, that it was somebody else.
If the numbers pointed to Nicholas's guilt, law enforcement says so did evidence found at his house near the time of his arrest in 2019.
It was almost like a lair. There was no working electricity at this house, stacks of pornography all throughout the place. We also found a newspaper from 1994 that had on its front page an article about the Sarah Yarborough case. And going through one of the kitchen drawers, we found a torn photograph taken from a magazine, a woman in a cheerleading outfit.
When the prosecutors showed that photo in the courtroom, the oxygen left the room.
Yeah.
Montez downplayed their significance.
I think both of those pieces of evidence were not especially strange given the general state of his house. There were stacks and stacks of newspapers all over his house.
This is evidence tape.
Patrick Nicholas didn't flinch as the evidence was shown, showing no emotion throughout the trial. But Sarah Yarborough's presence was felt, especially when now retired Captain Scott Strathy carefully unpackaged and displayed Sarah's clothing that had been in storage for over 30 years. Her drill team jacket, shoes, sweater, even her nylon stockings.
This was like opening a time capsule.
All of a sudden, they were real things. They weren't even photographs. They were the things she had on her body when she died. You sort of felt yourself crumble.
After 9 long days of testimony, the case went to the jury.
All eyes for the jury.
It took them just over a day to reach a verdict.
I was shaking, and like just that, like there was so much adrenaline and so much anticipation.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Patrick Leon Nicholas.
Everything just dropped, and it's like, what?
Why do you think it took law enforcement so long to identify Patrick Nicholas as a suspect? Take a look at a timeline of the case at 48hours.com.
The
This is the state of Washington versus Patrick Leon Nicholas.
Sarah Yarborough's loved ones had waited over 30 years for this moment.
We, the jury, find the defendant,
But then,
Patrick Leon
shock.
Nicholas, not guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree, premeditated.
Patrick Nicholas was found not guilty of the first charge, premeditated first-degree murder.
I remember dropping my head to my hands. I was angry, I was in disbelief.
When that first one came in not guilty, I closed my eyes.
But there were other charges, and there was still hope of a conviction.
Guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree, guilty in the second degree.
Patrick Nicholas was found guilty of first-degree murder and second-degree murder. The jury ruled both had been committed with a sexual motivation.
I remember hearing the family behind me cry, and I made eye contact with the jurors and nodded at them. You know, they got it right.
I feel so grateful for those detectives, for the boys, for the previous victims, for every witness who took the stand. So grateful that all these people came together.
2 weeks after Nicholas's conviction, dozens of people who had been involved in every part of Sarah's case gathered back at the courthouse for his sentencing hearing. Prosecutors asked the judge to impose extra time to take into account all of Nicholas's crimes.
The sentencing hearing was exhilarating in a way that I never expected. It was probably the most raw human courage I have ever seen in my life.
Sarah's death left our family broken, and we've never been the same.
The pain in my father's voice over the phone telling me Sarah was dead.
Person after person took to the podium to say all that Patrick Nicholas had taken from them.
Coming face to face with pure evil that day has deeply impacted my entire life.
He took her life and what was sure to be a brilliant future from her. In taking Sarah, he took the innocence of every one of us.
To face Patrick Nicholas and to say what they had been wanting to say to his face for 30 years.
Patrick Nicholas is pure evil.
There was so much power in the room. It was electric.
And then Ann Croney, who wasn't allowed to testify at Sarah's trial, started speaking.
He just did like a double take and shuddered when Ann stood up.
Like he saw a ghost.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sure he didn't expect to ever see my face or hear my name ever again.
We rely on a system of justice that is designed to protect us from predators like Nicholas. And this system failed me, it failed Sarah, her family, friends, and countless others. I ask the court to please not make the same mistake.
After everyone spoke, Judge Josephine Wiggs addressed the court.
When I think about this poor child, and what she experienced fighting for her life.
Judge Wiggs put her fist on the thing and said, "This was a child." She kept saying that, and all I could think was,
oh my gosh.
That's right. We were children.
Yep.
Nicholas received a sentence of almost 46 years. For Sarah's family and friends, the sentence brought mixed emotions.
I don't know that this is justice. It is a verdict, and it is putting someone away for something that they did. But he got 30 years that she didn't get.
It makes me mad that he was free for so many years, and who knows, however many other people were hurt during that time. I don't know that we'll ever know, and that could have been avoided.
Forensic genetic genealogy helped solve Sarah's case, but prosecutors say similar technology could have identified Patrick Nicholas years earlier if only familial DNA searches were allowed in Washington state. In a familial DNA search, an unknown DNA sample is compared against profiles already in CODIS to search for possible family members. Remember, Patrick Nicholas's brother's DNA had been in CODIS for years.
The legislation just doesn't exist in this state to allow that search.
California uses it. the UK, as I understand.
New York, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Colorado, Florida.
Do you think it's time to get that law changed?
We do.
Me too.
The Yarboroughs agree and hope that Sarah's case can make a difference.
I would like to know that other parents don't have to wait 30 years.
What do you hope her legacy is?
I think her legacy is she was always someone who brought people together. She's brought all the people together that attended the trial. That's the kind of person she was.
For Drew Miller, who at 13 found Sarah's body, the connections made at trial finally brought him some peace.
Knowing he's in prison is fantastic, but knowing her family and friends is way more important to me, because that's what's given me the actual healing that I needed.
This is probably the beginning of our junior year.
Sarah's friends will always remain bonded by the past and Sarah's stolen future.
Not only was she beautiful, her soul was beautiful, and the grace and the beauty that she carried and left with all of us, we won't forget her. We will never forget her.
New CBS Next.
He's not breathing.
A surgeon's girlfriend found dead.
He provided those drugs.
Was this a case of a controlling doctor's depravity?
This was not just some simple accident. This was much more.
A new 48 Hours, next on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
And can you start by telling me your name and who you are?
Sure. I'm Ann Croney, and I'm the one that got away from Patrick Nicholas. Got away alive and safe.
That's Ann Croney, a remarkable woman who survived an attempted attack by Patrick Nicholas back in 1983 when she was just 21 years old. I met Ann while reporting on the story of Sarah Yarborough, another young woman attacked by Nicholas 8 years later. Tragically, Sarah died. I'm Natalie Morales of 48 Hours. Now, so much of our work at 48 Hours focuses on the stories of victims who didn't survive. But what about those like Ann, who lived to tell? From 48 Hours, this is It Could Have Been Me. And today I'm joined by 48 Hours field producer Lauren Clark. And Lauren, we're here to talk about Ann Croney's story. But before we do, I think it's important that people understand the case of Sarah Yarborough.
Yeah, so Sarah she was a 16-year-old girl living in kind of the suburbs of Seattle back in 1991. When she was found strangled on her high school campus. It was a horrible case for the people of the community. It was a December day. It seems she had missed the time for a drill team practice. She had thought she had to get there early, but the rest of the team wasn't arriving for another hour or so. So she had pulled into the parking lot in her car. Not many people, no one was around. And she was found just about 300 feet from her car, strangled. She was still partially clothed in her drill team uniform, and there was a pile of clothes found nearby her body in the grass. Investigators at the time believed her murder had been sexually motivated, but they didn't have really a ton to go on. They did rounded up the usual suspects and, really worked the case. But for almost 30 years, Sarah's case went unsolved.
Yes, and it's important to note the clothing that Sarah was wearing and the clothing on the side. There was DNA evidence, but again, this was 1991 and DNA technology had not evolved yet to the point where we are today. So investigators did their part. They preserved very carefully that evidence, but they knew, Lauren, that at some point in time, that they would hopefully be able to get clues and to be able to verify and use that DNA to hopefully find a match down the road. As you said, for a long time, the case went cold for nearly 30 years until a forensic genetic genealogist was able to crack the case. She was hired to track some new leads.
Yeah, in 2019, this forensic genetic genealogist went through and basically reverse engineered finding a match to the genetic profile that they had at the scene. And she narrowed it down to these two brothers, one of whom had been incarcerated. So he was in the federal database. He was in CODIS, so it wasn't him. And that's when they focused on Patrick Leon Nicholas. And what investigators did with the King County Sheriff's Department, he still lived in the Seattle area. So they followed him. They found him. They trailed him. They actually went to a laundromat where he was doing laundry and watched as he smoked a cigarette, and then watched him discard the cigarette outside the laundromat right on the sidewalk there. And when he went back inside, they grabbed that cigarette, packaged it up securely, and sent it to a lab. And the DNA from that cigarette was a match to the DNA that had been found on Sarah's clothes all those years ago.
So then, Lauren, how did you come to find out and hear about Ann Croney's story?
So in early 2023, Patrick Nicholas went on trial for the murder of Sarah Yarborough. And right before trial, we had learned through some pretrial motions that Patrick Nicholas actually had a prior criminal record. The judge had ruled that evidence wouldn't be allowed at trial, but we were able to read through and we knew that there had been some previous attacks. And I heard, as we were at trial talking to people, there were kind of whispers like, one of the victims is here. And it was kind of this remarkable, like, oh my gosh, how could someone be here to take that on? I didn't know who it was at the time, but we did learn that back in the early 1980s, Patrick Nicholas had served time as a juvenile for raping 2 women and attempting to rape a third. Reading through the case files, we learned that he had approached multiple women at their cars. He would kind of casually strike up a conversation with them and then pull a knife and order them to undress.
So this brings us now to Ann Croney's remarkable story. And let's go back in time to 1983 in Richland, Washington. That's about 200 miles from where Sarah Yarborough was found dead. Now, Ann was just 21 years old at the time. She was a server at a restaurant. She was also a lifeguard. She loved the water, and specifically the Columbia River. So that's an important part of the story, because on June 13th, 1983, the day all of this happened, Ann said she had just tragically lost one of her really good friends, and she just wanted to sit alongside the river to think. Here's her story.
So I pulled into the parking lot and got out of the car and sat on the bumper of my car.
And you're sitting there thinking, having some time to yourself. How quickly before a man approached you?
It wasn't long. It was maybe a few minutes, and he walked up to me and started a conversation. I don't remember exactly how the conversation started, but he introduced himself, said his name was Pat, and he was new in town, and he was working on an old building in town called the Griggs Building that was empty. And he was working on a remodel. I knew the space well. I knew the story he was talking about. I knew everything about it, and he didn't seem to know anything. He seemed to be kind of making things up.
As you listen to that, I mean, Lauren, what struck us, I mean, already her instinct, sort of her spidey senses are going off. Something is off here with this guy. She knows that space well, that she's talking about the Griggs Building. She's like, nothing seems to be adding up. He's acting strange, but he's a good-looking guy. She described him as youngish. He's got blondish hair, glasses, a mustache, but she's getting a really bad vibe from him, right?
Her alarms were going off in her head at that point.
So another fact, as they continued to talk, Nicholas told her he couldn't swim.
And again, that really struck Ann as being odd, because that area along the Columbia River there, like, it gets hot in the summer. It is dry, and swimming and water skiing and just all sorts of activities along the water. It's what everyone does there in the summer. So for him to say that, it really stuck out to her. And overall, it's just, as he keeps talking, she's kind of placating him, but she's just getting a very weird vibe from him all along.
I noticed his voice was getting shaky, and I told him I had to go. So I went around and got into my car, and my door was open, and I had a 2-seater sports car. And he knelt in between the door and me, and
got in your way?
I was in the car. So I got in the car, And the door was open, and he knelt down between the door and me, and told me his name. He gave me his name and phone number, and he asked for my phone number, and I gave it to him, and I went to close the door, and he put a knife to my throat.
And what was he saying as he put the knife to your throat?
He told me not to scream. He told me to take my clothes off. So I did take my clothes off, and as I was doing that, I noticed a couple of people walking to a car that was parked sort of nearby, and I did scream, but he put the knife to my throat a little harder and pushed me down and laid on top of me so they couldn't see me.
It's really hard to hear Anne describing those moments, just to think about the terror that must have been going through her mind. She told us, after he put the knife to her throat, he actually took her underwear and put them in her mouth almost as a sort of gag so that she wouldn't keep screaming, so that she wouldn't be heard.
Right. And there were people nearby pulling up into the parking lot. So she was trying to get people to notice and to come help her. But talk about that terrifying few minutes for her. Well, we learned from Anne then what happens next.
He told me to get out of the car, and he had a shirt that he put over my head. He actually told me to put it on, and I refused. So he put it over my head and put my left arm through it and grabbed the back of it and shoved me towards the bank of the river. And we started walking, and we got about halfway down the bank, and he told me to stop. And I didn't. Instead of stopping, I pulled the shirt off over my head and ran down the bank and dove into the river and swam. Because at that time I was thinking he told me he couldn't swim. So I swam out and swam as hard as I could.
Swam for your life.
I swam for my life. All I had on was my tennis shoes. And I swam to a dock and started screaming for help.
Wow. I mean, to have the presence of mind to be thinking in that moment, he told me he can't swim. And to see that is your opportunity.
Every time I hear that, I just get goosebumps, because even as she was reliving that moment, you could just see the terror in her eyes and just feel the emotion of that. Truly remarkable.
Yeah, and just talk about all the moments of luck here, all the things that happened for her to be able to put that together, that he couldn't swim, that he was leading her towards that riverbank. We went down there to film it, and it's very steep. It's very hard to just jump right down there.
So once she swam for her life and made it to the dock, thankfully, there were people there, and she was able to get help, and the police came to her help as soon as she arrived there. And so she was able to tell police, this happened to me, and his name is Pat, and gave them a good description of who they were looking for.
And based off of his name and his description, the local police pretty soon realized that Pat was likely this man, Patrick Nicholas, who had just recently been released from a halfway house nearby for those previous attacks that he had committed on a juvenile. So police went to track him down. They visited his apartment. He wasn't there. They suspected he must have fled, gotten out of town really quickly, but they did find some key evidence there. They found the notebook that Anne had remembered writing her number down in, and I think they actually found a piece of the page torn out where he had tried to give her his number. So after they searched his apartment, we're like, okay, this is probably our guy. They went to the airport and found out that Patrick Nicholas had hopped a flight soon afterwards and gotten out of town. They tracked him down to the Midwest, and within a few weeks, they arrested him. And he actually pleaded guilty to first-degree attempted rape.
He was sentenced back then to what was the maximum sentence that he could receive, and that was 10 years in prison. So Anne assumed, rightfully so, that he's safely locked away for those 10 years, all of those 10 years in Washington State Prison. But it turns out in 1987, Nicholas is let out early on parole. So Anne was never notified. Police never told her, never sent her a letter or anything to let her know that the guy who did this to you, he is now out. She told us, though, Lauren, that she tried really hard within those years to kind of put this out of her mind, and she didn't want it to have a major impact on her life. All of that changed, though, in 2019. Here's Ann again.
The police knocked on my door in Portland and said that there were detectives in Seattle that wanted to talk to me about a cold case. And I had no idea what they were talking about. And they wanted to come interview me about it. So that was the first I'd heard of it.
And how did you feel hearing about what happened to Sarah? What did they tell you about her story?
They told me that there were similarities in the cases. And I was crushed.
It's this part in the interview I remember. This is where Ann just kind of paused and broke down. She'd been really kind of strong through that interview and was just recounting things. But I think, this is describing the realization that Sarah Yarborough's murder wasn't any way connected to what had happened to her so many years ago.
And she, I think, was dealing with, as she described to us, her own version of survivor's guilt. Once she realized how her story and Sarah's were connected tragically.
Yeah. It had never occurred to me that what I escaped from was a murder. I just had always figured I'd escaped from a rapist, which you can survive a rapist, you get past it. You can't get past murder. And the fact that she was only 16 was really hard to hear. And then when I found out that he had been released early, and this happened when he was supposed to be in prison.
For what he did to you.
For what he did to me, really affected me.
I bet you were angry, a lot of
I
it.
was very angry.
When he was arrested for what he did to you, he confessed. And he wrote in his confession, "I realize I have a problem concerning raping girls." You had never heard that?
No. So
he says that, and he ended up serving.
So why was he let out after 3.5 years? Yeah. What a little f***er. No, I didn't know that. You know, Sorry. Sorry.
So that's the part you didn't hear on our 48 Hours episode, obviously, because of the language. Now, we all kind of laughed a little bit at that, but usually humor is a coping mechanism, and that was the case here. This was truly a very traumatic experience and memory for Ann, and especially, learning that he did not complete his full sentence, and then hearing that detail that she only heard now for the very first time, that he had told police at the time that he had a problem raping girls, trying to rape girls, and yet he was able to get out early on parole, which she just was clearly very angry, but at the same time, she had to laugh at the insanity of it all.
I remember in that interview, she had been so strong. And then it just kind of broke through. And yeah, you hear us laughing in the background because we're all crying. And then hearing it, like, oh.
It just gave us a moment of levity. I think just having her real life reaction, I think it just made us all so grateful that she was able to speak so freely and to just tell it like it is with us.
And I remember, we weren't really sure how far she'd want to go. We'd wanted to be very sensitive with this because we knew it was a lot for her to come forward, using her name to come on TV to talk about this.
We actually were in this really incredible space because we wanted her to feel very comfortable. It was like a horse ranch. It was my version of paradise. And there was horse therapy right outside the door. So after this interview, we all went out and we were petting the horses because we needed it. I mean, it was just really such a powerful interview. And she just gave us so much.
Absolutely. I mean, her strength just stuck out to us all along. And even going back to the trial, so I was there, we were hearing these whispers that there was a victim there. And it was almost inconceivable. I mean, like, wait, how could someone have the strength to come and do this? And learning that it almost brought this back full circle for her, that she had thought she had done her duty back in 1983, that she had put away this bad guy, that the justice system had worked for her. And then so learning that it had failed Sarah Yarborough by him being let out early so that he was able to attack Sarah Yarborough, she felt like she had to be there. She had to see justice truly be done this time around.
I mean, she was there for as much of the trial as she could be. You were there, Lauren. I mean, there was so much emotion. It was a packed courtroom. Her friends, her family, they were all there. They were there to witness this moment nearly 30 years later. That speaks to the kind of woman that Sarah Yarborough was. She was a connector.
I've actually never seen anything like this. And it was almost overflowing. Everybody, usually in a trial, there's like the victim side, the victim's family side, and then the defendant side. And in this, there were just so many people there.
So this brings us to how Anne Croney came into the courtroom and where she sat. You know, the courtroom's full, so she goes and chooses to sit right behind Patrick Nicholas because that was the open spot.
I was sitting there thinking I could easily jump up and put my hands around his neck, or I could slam his face into the table. That would be great. And I thought, no, I don't think anybody else would really appreciate that. So,
order in the court.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting because it made me think that two of Sarah's friends said they first saw you get behind him. They're like, is she with him? No. And then they cornered you. They said they got out into the hallway and they were like, who are you? Like wanting to know what you were there for.
Yes.
So they hadn't heard your story yet
No.
or about you. I guess the judge wouldn't allow that. Yeah.
I think they must have heard something because they did ask my connection. And I said, I believe I told them I was the one that got away. And it took them a second. And then, yeah.
And they full embrace.
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful people. Oh my gosh, wonderful people.
Sarah's been gone a long time, but they could hug Anne.
And they have remained friends with Anne Croney, which is remarkable.
The thing that I heard in court was that one of his survivors is here and she's a badass. And then I remember I just gave her my card very tactfully. I don't know if you want to talk. But then I remember at your interview with her, Natalie, we were sitting there and we were just like, she's a badass. Like, I get it. Yep. And Natalie, in your interview, you asked her what Nicholas looked like when she saw him in court. And here was her response.
Can I say it?
Yes, go ahead.
He
We'll
looked
bleep
like
you
a
out.
piece of shit. I mean, he just looked like an old piece of shit. You know, he was young when I saw him. He was young. Vital comes to mind, fairly attractive, and he's just an old piece of shit now. Sorry.
You heard the anger there. She was still, living in that moment. But even though she was struck by the fact that his appearance had changed, but she said looking at him and staring at him in the eyes, she saw those same evil eyes staring back at her. They were the same. So after the jury found Patrick Nicholas guilty of the murder of Sarah Yarborough, Anne was able to finally speak her truth by giving a victim impact statement during the sentencing hearing. Let's listen to some of that.
We rely on a system of justice that is designed to protect us from predators like Nicholas, and this system failed me. It failed Sarah, her family, friends, and countless others. I ask the court to please not make the same mistake.
And I don't know if Nicholas knew that she was there until this moment. And she stood up and she gave it to him. And she told the judge, like, hey, don't mess this up again. I can't imagine the feeling that she had inside of her to do that. It must have been so scary and so intimidating at first. But she told you, like, it was really that community and that love from Sarah's friends and family that really helped her get up there and put it all out there.
Yeah.
And he was, and the judge did sentence him to 46 years in prison. So he's not going to get out anytime soon.
And I think an important detail was that Anne has a daughter as well at the time of the trial who was Sarah Yarborough's age, 16 years old, and how much that probably impacted her as she was saying those words.
Yeah. And she talked with you in her interview about how, like, they have had talks about how when something happens, what to do when you're attacked, that you fight. And if you're lucky, really, like the luck here is so essential. If you can put those pieces together, you can get away. She was able to really follow her instincts there. And again, the luck of being near the water and knowing that he couldn't swim, her gut telling her that something was off. She was able to have the presence of mind to recall all of this, to get away. So, I mean, just her thinking that, all right, I've got to protect my kid here, give her the tools she could use. I mean, it's really, really impactful.
Yeah, I mean, truly everything sort of lined up in order for her to be able to survive. There was also a moment, what I love about Anne is that she told us she wanted to take back that part of her life. She decided to do a triathlon that summer after Nicholas's murder trial, diving right back into those very waters of the Columbia River that saved her life. And she started by parking in the exact same spot that she did in that parking lot in the park where the attack occurred. Take a listen.
The parking lot's the same. The trees have grown up, so it looks different, but the bank is a lot steeper than I thought it was, and further up from the river. It's about 10 feet. So I was surprised. Pretty proud of myself for what I'd done, because it was pretty amazing that I was able to do that. There was a reason that I was meant to do that, and I was able to do that. But doing the triathlon was interesting. I didn't have any odd or bad feelings. Swimming in the river was great.
Do you feel like you reclaimed that
Absolutely.
space, though?
I do, because the swim took off at the same dock that I was rescued on. So I do. I felt like I reclaimed all of that, and there's no fear to stop me from doing what I love to do.
We just loved that moment so much.
Even after going through hearing about Sarah Yarborough's death, going through the trial, stepping forward, she was like, you know what? I want to get back there. And I want to show that I can do this, and I'm going to reclaim this. It's just incredible.
And I think you hear a lot of survivors who say that. They say, I wanted to, get myself back, take my power back. And in doing that triathlon, she did. I think it's so important that we tell these survivors' stories, because I think we can all learn so much from them as well. What it takes to do something when something feels off or doesn't feel right, what it takes to speak up, what it takes to fight back, to scream as loud as you can possibly scream. She did all of that and then some. And then at the end of the day, she got her peace with justice. Lauren, I have to thank you so much for joining me. And of course, I have to say our thanks as well to Anne Croney. And thanks to all of you who have listened. And be sure to stay tuned for more stories from courageous individuals like Anne by following and listening to 48 Hours, It Could Have Been Me on Tuesdays on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like this episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I'm Natalie Morales for 48 Hours.